Good day to you, internet stranger. I've decided to redo this video. If my old one's still up, awesome. If not, well, you get this one. Hooray! Why does death and brutality follow the totalitarian state everywhere it goes? This is kind of a important question because what do we see? We see in the history of humankind, every time government gets really, really big and overreaches and pushes for socialist utopias like with Nazi Germany, or the complete takeover of everything imaginable like in communist Russia, we see that brutality and even genocide follows as a result. And we want to know why, right? These are well-meaning ideas, right? Marxism is a well-meaning idea, supposedly. At least that's what they claim. Where if you just have the right person at the head, everything will all just be unicorns and rainbows, and the sun will shine every day, and everything will just be oh so perfect. Well, we have yet to see the actual fruit of that being true. We see actually that every genocide, at least to my knowledge, that has happened in the recorded history of humanity, has come from a government pretty much overreaching, deciding that they know better than other people, even to point where they decide who should live and who should die. Why is this? Well, I'm going to tell you, it's inevitable that this will happen, and here's why. We're going to break down two different categories. One is going to be an institution that is passive by nature, and the other is going to be an institution that is violent by nature. We're going to take a look first at some passive institutions. We're going to start with the family. The family is designed to be a passive institution. Traditionally, tradition's gone out the window, but traditionally it was a husband and a wife. They would produce biological offspring. They would nurture and care and feed and educate their children within their home and grow them up. The Industrial Revolution changed that, and of course we've transcended beyond a man and a woman family, so not going to touch that, but that traditional family has changed pretty dramatically now, but it's a passive institution, and here's why. If the husband gets in an argument with the wife, the husband does not come in and beat his wife into submission, right? He can't do that. Violence is not something that's meant to be within the institution of the family. It's passive. Okay? Your church, your religious group, or whatever entity you are tied to in that way, if you go to your church and you find out your pastor has had a divine revelation from God, and he's going to take the church in a new direction, and you're looking in your Bible going, God actually says we're not supposed to do that. Are you sure God spoke to you in a dream? And you get in a big argument with your pastor, and you find out, oops, you can't reconcile. What's the worst thing that can happen? You go your separate way, right? That's it. He can't come after you. He can't seize your property. He can't incarcerate you. He certainly can't kill you. It's a passive institution. It's based on the idea that you are free to come and go as you please. Likewise, the market, the free market is what we have in the United States, supposedly free. But basically, nobody can force you to buy anything, nor can you force people to sell you anything, or vice versa. You're free. If you go down to the Ford dealership, you see the pickup you want, it's $45,000. You think, well, I got $38,000. I maybe could wiggle up a little bit, but let's go see what Chevy does. And so you go over to the Chevy dealership, you find the same package truck. It's just got the Chevy logo and their little quirks to it. And you go to the dealer and you're like, hey, I went to the Ford lot. You've got the same truck. What are you asking for this? Can you cut me a deal? I'll buy from you over Ford if you get your price down a little bit. The Chevy dealer looks at you and goes, actually, we want $1 million for our pickup. And you go, what? No way am I buying that. The worst thing that can happen in that is you go your separate way, right? The Chevy dealer can't force you through the incarceration of your person or killing you or your family members. He can't incentivize you through violence because it's a passive institution. Likewise, he doesn't have to sell his product. You can't sit there and throw rocks through his windows to try to incentivize him to sell. It's a non-violent institution. The market is by its nature meant to be non-violent. The threat of death does not loom in it. If you show up to your doctor, and in a free market healthcare system, you show up to your doctor, he checks you out, does the physical, and he says, hey, you got some pretty good kidneys, 2 of them. and we have a patient coming in right after you. He's had some kidney issues. We don't know if he's going to need a transplant or not, but if he does, would you be willing to donate your kidney? Well, in a free market system, they can ask. I mean, it's kind of weird, but okay, they ask. And you can go, no, I kind of like my kidneys. Thank you, I'm going to leave. But if you give the power of the sword to the doctor, he can sit there and go, well, you know, we're going to fine you $500 a day that you keep this guy from getting one of your 2 healthy kidneys. It's not fair that you have 2 healthy kidneys and both of his look like they're going bad. So we can incarcerate you and do this through force, right? No, it's a non-violent institution. The sword would be seizure of property, incarceration of person, or the ending of the life of that person does not belong in that institution. So everything I've mentioned is designed by nature to be a passive institution. The worst thing that can happen is you go your own way. You agree to disagree, they go do their thing, you go do yours, right? Free voluntary transactions. Now, when you look at the government, does it work that way? The government passes a law or makes a decree or raises taxes. Do you just say, hey, you know, that's nice. You do you. I'm going to go do me. No. They pull out their big old sword and say, guess what? You are either going to pay those taxes, you're going to follow our laws, you're going to do whatever X, Y, or Z that we've listed now, or else we're going to incarcerate you, seize your property, and in some cases, we'll even go so far as to kill you. Totalitarian states, that's kind of the problem. But anyhow, right, they're a violent institution. That does not mean the violence that the threat of the sword doesn't have a place. It does, but here's where it doesn't belong. When you have passive institutions, like the family, like your church, like the free market, like healthcare, the threat of death does not belong in these institutions. Like I said, if a husband starts beating his wife, the threat of death does not belong in the institution of marriage, does not belong in the family. What does the sword do? They're meant to keep that out of those institutions. If they see a sword being born within the family, they are to bear their sword against the sword within there and stop it. Husband can't beat up his wife. You can't bash your child's head off the concrete. That doesn't belong there. Likewise, your church. You go to leave the church, he can't hunt you down in your sleep or make you pay double the amount of tithes that you were paying. Right? The government bears the sword to keep the sword out of these institutions. Okay? Doctor's going to steal your kidney. Government comes in and says, no, you can't do that. But here's where totalitarian states screw up. In that they're totalitarian. They reach in the family. We're going to be responsible for raising your children. We're going to be responsible for the provisions. Oh, you need food? Well, we'll have, during the time of the coronavirus, we're going to have lines outside our school. We'll be responsible for feeding your child lunch. We'll be responsible for your retirement. We'll be responsible for your health care. We'll be responsible for what you can and can't say in your church. We'll be responsible for what vehicles you can buy. Does it meet our standards? We have this big old list over here, and if you don't meet it, we're going to incarcerate your person, fine you, seize your property, and maybe one day it'll get bad enough to kill you. You hear the overpopulation thing. What's their... See any links? All right, I'll let that die. I'll leave that alone. I won't run down that rabbit trail. But once the government, in its pursuit of becoming totalitarian, has reached into enough passive institutions and usurped the things that belong in a passive institution and brought them into the only institution that can bear the sword, they inevitably have brought violence into everything. So it is inevitable that every totalitarian state will have brutality, and yes, even to the point of mass genocide. It can't end any other way, because all these myriads of things that should never have the sword in them has been brought into them by the government, just in their claiming of the responsibility. Education. If you have a private school, how many private schools can force you to pay the money? Especially if you don't have kids. None. If you have kids and you choose to send them to a school, okay, now you have a voluntary transaction where you exchange education of your children for dollars. But in a public education system where the government reaches in and says, you know what, we're going to do it for reasons X, Y, or Z, They come in and say, we're going to do it because some families aren't good enough to do it, or we have specific ideas that we want to put into your child's brain, or whatever it might be. Clearly isn't that they get better grades in public school, so they can't use that one. Let that rest, Daniel, let that rest. Okay, so when they reach in and they say, all right, we're going to take charge of education, now everybody under the threat of the sword has to pay for it. You can have no children. None. You could have never have had children. You could have had your nuts squished and you can't have children. You better believe they're coming for your money. And if you don't fund it, they're going to incarcerate you or seize your property. In the totalitarian states like Communist Russia, Nazi Germany with the Hitler Youth, they did this in buckets. And yeah, you kind of did ultimately have the threat of death in both of those between the KGB, the Gestapo, re-education facilities, and when you look at entire races and ethnicities of people who were persecuted to the point of death, the totalitarian state. We're going to make humanity better, healthier, more athletic. We're going to make the German perfect. Well, now that they've reached in an area they don't belong, procreating, they start mass exterminating people. Now, it may not be an extreme like that. The totalitarian state might be not quite totally totalitarian yet. They might just have fragments, like England. Alfie Evans, a toddler over there in England, a 2-year-old toddler, roughly, somewhere around in there. This is a few years back. They're a single-payer healthcare system. And this child, because it was now the government's responsibility to tend to your needs of your healthcare. They claim you have a right to healthcare. Really, it's just a hurdle because now you have to get their approval. Single-payer system, so you can't go fund your own healthcare. You can't go to your family if healthcare is expensive. In the United States, healthcare is expensive. But I can still go to my parents and say, hey, I need help. I can go to my church and say, I need help. I can get money from other sources. Single-payer system, it all has to come from the government. It's illegal for it to come anywhere else. It has to be from the government. Government is doing everything in there. This is single-payer system setup. So anyhow, when you look at England, the Alfie Evans case, parents have this child. He slips into a coma. He has this medical condition. And the totalitarian state, as far as healthcare goes, says, you know what? We're not going to fund this anymore. We're going to unplug him. We think it's better for him to not remain in this state. Now, both agree. The parents think it's better for him not to remain in a comatose state. The government says it's better for him not to remain in a comatose state, but they're opposite ends of the spectrum past that middle point. The parents are thinking, we'll take him to the United States. There's an experimental treatment over there. We might be able to wake him up from his coma. He might be able to have some semblance of a decent life. Single-payer healthcare system over there in Britain's thinking, we're going to unplug him and he's going to die. It's better for him to die than to be in a coma. Well, because government reached into the institution of the family, they reached into the institution of the free market and the healthcare. Now they control all of that, and the parents are like, we want to take our kid, and the government says, no, we're not only going to unplug him, he can't leave our hospital. Even though we know the end result is his death, in a matter of days he will die, you cannot remove him. He's going to die here in this bed, period. This got so bad that the Pope over in Italy gave this little Alfie baby Italian citizenship to try to extradite him from England so he could ultimately go to the United States and get this treatment. England refused the Pope. Now, we hear from our politicians all the time, single-payer system, it's a right to health care, it's a human right. Did Alfie Evans have a right to health care? Ultimately, there was a limit on it. If the government didn't approve of the specific methodology of his health care, or the conditions that may result from it, they thought his death was better than treating him. That's a hurdle. That's not a right. That's a hurdle to your right. In the United States, it's expensive. But through your own efforts, or your family, or your church, you have the ability to get health care from wherever you want. If you show up, I did this in my other video, I'm probably going to take it down since I'm covering all these points anyway. But in Italy, right now we have the coronavirus stuff. And about a month ago or 3 weeks ago, I forget when, some news articles broke about how the how triage had started in the Italian hospital system. Now, they're a single-payer system. This is like a habitual problem for them. They're a single-payer system, which means the government determines everything. They're the only one who can fund it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they started practicing triage. If you were over 60 years old, you were not going to get a ventilator. Ventilators were very, very critical if you were in bad shape with the coronavirus. You needed them really to have any kind of chance. And they thought it was far better to give the ventilators they had to the patients who had a much better chance of living. Well, the 60-year-olds and up are the group, the demographic, by a huge margin that succumbs to this illness. My age demographic, the last statistics change all the time. The last one I saw was a 0.2% chance. That's 2 in every 1,000, 1 in every 500. You get to the elderly, and you're looking at like 1 in 10, 1 in 7. They're the ones who need the medical attention. There are exceptions. There are always exceptions. But overwhelming statistics point towards them. Anyhow, that was the age demographic. They cut out the ones that overwhelmingly would need it. It was illegal for them to get it. The hospitals wouldn't give it to them. And they'd say, doctors have to make hard choices all the time, so we're just helping make the decisions easier. Bull crap. See, in the free market system, if I go down to the hospital 10 miles that way, and I have the coronavirus. Well, I won't use myself. Let's use two people. There's a 35-year-old and there's a 65-year-old. And they both go to the same hospital. There's a doctor. He has 1 ventilator, 2 sick patients. He has to make a hard decision with his 1 ventilator. One doctor looks at the 2. He has to make a hard decision. The 35-year-old, I'm pretty sure I can save. You 65-year-old guy, I just don't know. So I'm going to give the ventilator to the 35-year-old guy. Okay. The 65-year-old, however, is not barred. If he can find another ventilator, if the hospital gets more in, they can call him back up. His family can help him search. His family can take him to another hospital. His church can take him to another something like that. So let's say they're in the United States, there's another hospital. It's 20 miles the opposite direction. They have 2 ventilators and no patients. Family gathers up the 65-year-old, drives him down there. He gets his ventilator. He gets some semblance of medical attention. In Italy, however, you show up at that one hospital, doctor has no decision to make. It's illegal for him to give the old guy the ventilator, so he gives it to the 35-year-old. Okay, now the old guy's family gathers him up, throws him in the car. They drive to the next hospital. They find that one has 2 and no patients. They're all ready. Here we go. We found it. Thank you, Lord. And the doctor says, I'm sorry, I can't give you a ventilator. And the family's like, well, you have 2. Help us save our granddad here. Sorry, the government is in control of healthcare, and they say no one over 60 gets one. That's not a right! That is a hurdle! That is not you gaining jack squat! Do not listen to these politicians who are telling you it's a human right. No, they are taking your rights away under the guidelines of saying, we'll pay for it. All you have to do is look at examples around the world. But see, they bring the sword into it. If that family with the Alfie Evans baby, if they take their child from the hospital, what happens? The government comes along with the sword. They either incarcerate the parents, fine them, or in England they won't kill the parents, but they're already killing the child, so you already have that happening. The parents just have to weigh the difference. Is it worth our incarceration and fines to try to keep them from killing our child? Unfortunately, the parents watch their child die. And that had to be difficult. Very difficult. But that's what happens when the totalitarian state claims things that don't belong. Now, I wasn't going to touch this. I'm going to do it. I'm already ranting and fired up. Fired up! Too much, Daniel. Slow it down. But with the coronavirus. Okay. So, right now, there's some states are easing their lockdowns. And as a whole, the country looks like it's moving that direction. But there's a question, should it have been locked down in the first place? Does the government have the responsibility to do this? Well, according to human history, we have never seen anything like this on this scale. At least I haven't. I can't think of any examples, including in other pandemics that were way worse than this one, like the Spanish flu or the Black Death of the 1300s. Way worse than anything here. But anyhow, I digress. We'll reel this back in. You have a woman who had a hair salon. She's starving. Her kids are starving. Her other stylists who work for her are all starving because they have no income. None. Government said, we'll provide, and they wrote them a check. Well, in many cases, people didn't get a check because they didn't qualify for some weird loophole that nobody ever talked about, but stop. All right. So anyhow, she ends up in front of a judge. Now, the judge is telling you need to apologize to all these government officials who you just like totally ignored. You're killing people by going to work. Baloney. She says, look, I respect you, but I cannot apologize for this because my children are going hungry. It is not for selfish reasons that I reopen my salon. My children, my other employees, and their children. You have to admit, eating is kind of important. Did the judge care? No. It's a totalitarian state. They care about their authority. Anyhow, so you ask the question. This is how I look at things like this. Does the sword belong in this? It does not. The sword does not belong in any of these things. You can still have a free transaction. If you are afraid of getting the disease, you can always self-quarantine. You can always do all of that. And you can have companies that go the extra mile and they'll get your business. If you're one of these fearful people who think everything's going to kill you, you can work with these stores that are designed in the free market. They're working to reach a group. They see there's a market here for people who want to be able to get their groceries without getting sick, right? The free market will respond to things like this. But when government comes in, bears the sword over everyone, you end up with situations like with this woman. Or the situation where there's people going through the drive-thru just like 50 yards away and there's no fines there, but these people are sitting in their car, windows rolled up, listening to a sermon over a loudspeaker in the church parking lot. They're not breathing the same air as anybody else. $500 per person per car. And then you have situations like on Easter. I forget which governor it was, but he's a piece of garbage anyway. He's up there, big crowd of news reporters and cops standing around him. Thank you all for coming. And then he goes and threatens this one pastor for having his Sunday service and said, I came over with a warrant and we arrested him and all this stuff. And I'm thinking, you arrested him for gathering, which is legal under the Constitution. Meanwhile, you have a big gathering of all these people bragging about how you arrested somebody else for gathering. But see, the government's determining what's essential, what's not. Your faith, your ability to hang with your fellow believers in Christ or whatever religious group you're a part of, no, that's not essential. But McDonald's drive-thru, that's essential. My job as a governor is essential. The least essential people during this were the governors. They put the biggest hurdles on top of their people. It's bad enough you were facing sickness. Now the government's coming in saying, we're going to fine or incarcerate you if you try to do anything that tends to your own needs. We're going to provide for you. We're going to write you a check, and you better like it. And if you don't qualify, tough. The government has brought the sword into institutions it never belonged in. I mean, the stuff that's been happening globally around the world would make communist Russia just drool in awe. Locking down the entire population of a country. And we see this over and over and over again. Death panels like in Italy. I doubled the length of my first video. But yeah, I think the content was better. So the next time you have a politician talking head on TV come in and tell you that government needs to step in, government can fix it. Ask yourself one question. Does the threat of death, seizure of property, or incarceration of person belong in this institution that they're trying to claim? Whatever it might be, your retirement, your college, your health care, or green economics, whatever it might be. Does the threat of death belong in that institution? Or is the government meant to keep the threat of death out of it? Which is what I believe. Government is to bear the sword against those who inappropriately bear the sword against others. Keep you free and safe from the evil, keyword, evil intentions of others. It keeps man's depravity in check. It keeps humanity's depravity in check. It's not meant to keep you safe under everything. Okay, this is my last rant. Promise, then I'm done. We're at 25 minutes. The government does everything in the name of safety. So why do we have building permits? To keep you safe. Why do we have health codes? Keep you safe. Why do they have gun control that they're touting all the time? To keep you safe. Why is everybody locked down in their house under the threat of being incarcerated? This is a joke. If you're already incarcerated in your home, what does it matter if you're incarcerated in a prison? Don't go there, Daniel. Stop. Back it up. Beep, beep, beep. Anyhow. The threat of death. Does it belong? Ask yourself that. All right, I'm done. Unplugging before 26 minutes. Thank you for watching. I always appreciate any constructive criticism. If I need to clarify something, great. If I have a bad idea, by all means, let me know. If I have to change something in my thought process or there's something I didn't consider, that's awesome. Peace.